also known as Clark Kent, and his birth name Kal-El, was introduced in Action Comics #1 all the way back in 1938. Superman has really formed what we know as superheroes and what they really are as a general basis, not only in terms of what they do, but what they look like. Most superheroes, or at least superhero spoofs, more or less look like Superman or several DC heroes of that same time frame. Superman was a very basic idea. Hell, the name Superman didn't even come from his original creators. But as a concept, he has thrived in superhero comics and movies for generations for one simple reason. Superman's cool. Superman has been multiple things, but Superman never really necessarily needs to change. Though they've tried to change him in many different ways, all Superman needs to be is the epitome of strength, justice, and just overall good. Frankly, I have many opinions of Superman in general. I'm more of a Marvel guy, but I do absolutely love certain DC heroes, like a lot, and most important of which is Superman. Hell, I'm gonna tell you right now, my favorite superhero is Superman. And that might sound like a person who has not read comics thing would say, but you know what? As a person who's read a lot of them, Superman is still really good. I really hate bad versions of Superman, specifically either badly written and also evil versions of Superman, because Superman just needs to be one thing to me, and the thing that I think emphasizes that the best is the Christopher Reeves Superman series, including the one that doesn't actually involve Superman and the one that doesn't really involve Christopher Reeves. Now, Superman has been put into lots of movies and TV shows and video games, so there's been a lot of different versions of Superman, but I feel like what really shows Superman at his best is, well, technically All-Star Superman, that animated movie, which is really good. And, you know, probably the animated series Superman, who's also sort of exactly what I'm going to say here. But more importantly, especially in terms of live-action movies, there is Christopher Reeve's Superman. Now, besides the one that, of course, involves Brandon Routh, which we will be talking about today, because it is involved, shut up, there hasn't actually been a lot of other live-action Supermen. Yeah, there's been The Adventures of Lois and Clark, which, regardless of the fact that they do have some references in the Arrowverse, I'm not going to be talking about that, at least not for a while. And it'll be a bit before I get into the more recent Superman, played by Henry Cavill, who, though very much looks like Superman, it's, you know, on and off on whether or not Superman was really well portrayed there. I'll get to my opinions of that another time again.
Like yours gets
but the movies
kicks
that really show off the
planning the
general
death of innocent
type
people,
of
no.
superheroes through Superman is
causing
the
the death of
Christopher
innocent
Reeves
people.
movie. That being said, though, this wasn't the first time Superman was portrayed in live action. There were several serials back in 1938, the most important of which being Superman and the Mole Men, a 58B movie released in 1951, which kind of wasn't all that great and had George Reeves as Superman, a man who unfortunately was well known for playing Superman and kind of not much else, which he really didn't like for most of his life. And besides that movie, he would also, of course, portray him in the Adventures of Superman TV show, which ran from 52 to 58. I do want to state the story of, due to the fact that people really liked him as Superman, one kid thought that he was just Superman because he would often go to public appearances as just Superman, not George Reeves. And this kid, of course, literally brought an actual gun and tried to shoot him, just to be like, block these bullets, Superman, which, wow, that is insane. It was clear to some people that due to the unfortunate way that George Reeves had died and the unfortunate events that would happen later on to Christopher Reeves, who is not related to George Reeves, that is a slightly different last name, that there is some sort of curse on the live-action actor of Superman, but in truth, lots of other live-action actors of Superman have been perfectly fine, mostly the one from Smallville, which I will also eventually talk about in the future. Welcome back to Through the Arrowverse, where we talk about every single thing that was even slightly involved with the Arrowverse, and that today we're talking about Christopher Reeves' Superman, the quadrilogy and its weird spin-off Supergirl movie, and all of its ins and outs and weird stuff, and how it eventually connects into the Arrowverse, and how. We'll get to that later on how it connects, but just go with the fact that it does, and it's part of the same multiverse, alright? We'll get to it later. But more importantly, I just wanted to talk about these Superman movies, right? Weirdly, I remember watching the original, and I think its sequel, I know we had them on DVD, them and the third one, for whatever reason. And I didn't watch them too much when I was younger, but I knew about them through the cultural zeitgeist of the multiple references to what happens in this and the second movie, right? But honestly, I never fully appreciated Superman or these movies until I really watched them semi-recently. Now, it's weird to say that Superman is my favorite superhero when considering the fact that he probably wasn't for a good number of decades in my life, but, you know, after really understanding what makes Superman great, that's the reason. And I feel like I can really portray what makes Superman great by talking about all these movies. So if you've not already watched these, it's a definitely good idea to watch all of them. There's a lot to enjoy from it, and there's a lot to go over. So if you haven't, go ahead and watch all 6 of these movies, because, oh boy, there's a lot to get into. And honestly, regardless of them being good or bad, it's still fun to go through. So let's get started with the original 70s Superman. Ilya Salkind and his father Alexander Salkind got the idea of a Superman film in 1973. Other live-action adaptations of Superman have happened, as mentioned before, and there was an attempt to make Superman into a TV show. It wasn't a Superman movie for a while, so why not make a new one? With help of producer Pierre Spengler, they went through this very difficult process with DC Comics to try and get the movie rights to make a Superman live-action film. Thankfully, they were able to buy the rights in 1974, and it took them a little bit to finally get around to actually making it. You know, due to the fact that they had to find the right people, which took them a while. The search for a director who really wanted to actually get on and make a Superman film was harder than you would expect. It's not like people didn't know about superhero films and how lucrative they would become, right? People knew about Superman. He, regardless of whatever you were reading, was the most popular superhero at that time, even after several Batman things came out, right? So one would have thought that a Superman film would have been made very quickly. But not only could they not find a director all that quickly, but they couldn't even find the right actor for Superman. Several directors, most notably Guy Hamilton and George Lucas, who turned down the commitment due to the fact that he was about to make, Star Wars. Steven Spielberg was about to direct it, having just finished with Jaws, but he decided that he was going to also do his own space movie, that being Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So both of those are very understandable. Tom Mankiewicz was drafted to rewrite the script that was written before when they were looking for directors, basically around the time when Richard Donner was hired to become the main director. At first, it was decided to film both Superman and Superman 2 simultaneously with Richard Donner. Principal photography began in March 1977 and ended in 1978. Tensions arose between Donner and the producers, and a decision was made to stop filming the sequel, of which 75% had already been completed, to finish the main first movie, just in case that, the idea of this first movie would fail, why complete the second one? It was the most expensive film up to that point, with a budget of $55 million. Superman was released December 1978 to critical and financial success, and its worldwide box office earnings were $300 million, making it the second highest grossing release of the year. Behind Star Wars. But alongside the awesome John Williams score and the great directing from Richard Donner, a lot of the praise went to the acting, most importantly, Christopher Reeves. He wanted a list of actors to be considered for Superman. Some of the choices were Muhammad Ali, which okay, Al Pacino, James Caan, Steve McQueen, fucking Clint Eastwood, and Dustin Hoffman. I don't know if any of these would have been better. Weirdly enough, though, Marlon Brando did sign on as Jor-El before they even found their actor for Superman, for a salary of $3.7 million and 11.75% of the box office gross profits, which would have been $19 million. They tried to cut down his time by having appear as a shit you not a green bagel, which would have used Marlon Brando's voice so they could cut down his salary. And regardless of the crazy ask that Marlon Brando came on with this, it's very much in the right to be mad soon afterwards when they didn't give him what they promised. Finally, they did try to get to their Superman actor. Robert Redford was offered, Burt Reynolds was offered, Sylvester Stallone, who is just an upcoming because of Rocky, was also offered. Paul Newman was not only just offered Superman, but also potentially Lex Luthor or Jor-El, because again, Marlon Brando, and he said no to all three. So they decided to go to a much lesser known actor. Casting director Lynn Stallmaster then suggested Christopher Reeve, who Richard Donner said no to, so they looked everywhere else. They apparently even got to the point where Ilya Salkind's wife's dentist was screen tested, which, you know what? That's weird. That's a universe I want to see. Finally, they went, all right, we'll get Christopher Reeves, who then was asked to basically work out like crazy so that he could fit into the suit that they were wanting him to get into. And boy, did he very much. Now with the Superman, principal photography began March 20th, 1977 at Pinewood Studios for the Krypton scenes, and the New York Daily News building was used for the Daily Planet, while Alberta, Canada was used for scenes set in Smallville, the little bit in the beginning there. The Fortress of Solitude is a mix of full-scale set and matte paintings. It's honestly very impressive looking, and with all that smoke, it's really easy to hide the fact that it is definitely a set. It's a very cool looking area and basically set up everyone's ideas of what the Fortress of Solitude looked like. It kind of looked like that in the comics until this movie came out, and then it's always looked like that since. Superman's a very fun movie. I love it to death. Though that being said, it's got a very, very, very simple plot. The opening scene, we see Jor-El, after sentencing the criminals Zod-Non and Ursa to exile to the Phantom Zone, something that doesn't make any sense for this point of the movie and just is there in the beginning for whatever reason, then finds out that the red supergiant sun right nearby is going to explode and destroy Krypton, of which, of course, Jor-El and Laura send off their son, Kal-El, to wherever, eventually finding himself into bumfuck nowhere, Kansas, that being Smallville, being found by Jonathan and Martha Kent, who are like, oh my god, he's a Superboy. We don't get too much time in Smallville, as especially when Jonathan Kent dies of a heart attack, and then gets a weird psychic message when he finds out that he is in fact from space, and his father is a spaceman. Gets a weird crystal, he brings it to the Antarctic to create the Fortress of Solitude, and gets a cool little costume. But of course continues to just be known as Clark Kent, which, regardless of whatever Bill from the movie where he gets killed might say, Clark Kent isn't fake him, Clark Kent is the real him, with Superman is the real show that he's putting on, but whatever. Clark Kent is of course very much attracted to his co-worker Lois Lane, and is often this big clumsy goofball, which he plays up so that nobody notices that he can just turn around and quick lip onto a different costume and go and save people. He does a lot of cool stuff, with the most important thing being him saving a plane from falling into a building that Lois Lane was like right nearby. In this really great scene with the fantastic John Williams score, just showing the absolute epicness that is Superman, which is a name that Lois Lane actually gives to him as Superman visits Lois Lane for a little interview that the two of them have, which really begins their romantic relationship. Her success quickly growing with her piece, that being My Night with Superman, which quickly gains the attention of Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor, who has hair here because he still had hair in the comics, actually. It kind of went back and forth depending which version you were talking about. This again was, but he wants to buy hundreds of acres of empty desert land and basically wants to blow up the San Andreas Fault with nuclear missiles. He thinks that Superman could probably stop him, so he decides to make a big plan by using a recently discovered meteorite that he just goes, it's probably from Krypton, it'll probably hurt him. So he sends his girlfriend Eve and his goofy cousin or something, Otis, to get a piece of it. Luthor just kind of easily gets Superman to his lair and just puts it around his neck, and Superman's like, Thanks to the fact that Lex is a really bad boyfriend, Eve just sort of takes it off of him. Great job. Superman's easily able to divert the missile into outer space, which is awesome, but at the same time, the Golden Gate Bridge got a little bit damaged, and some of the Hoover Dam broke. And while Superman's able to easily fix that, because he can do that because he's Superman, he isn't able to save Lois Lane. He gets so mad that he goes around the Earth to reverse time, which allows him to save Lois Lane. The movie ending with him bringing Lex Luthor and Otis to jail before flying out into the sunrise, probably getting ready for the plot, the second half of this plot that was set up in the beginning of the movie with the whole, Zod thing. We'll get there in a minute. I do enjoy this movie. Its plot is simple, but it's mostly about how awesome Superman is, and that's all it needs to be. And the whole point of Superman is to inspire people. When you look at Superman, you look at the absolute perfect person, and it inspires you to really know what you could be when you tried your hardest. Superman is this variable god. He can fly at supersonic speeds, he can move a whole mountain with ease, but he's a person that doesn't use this for his own desires and doesn't use it and abuse it like how a villain could, and he easily could, but that's the reason I don't like evil Supermans, right? Because the point of Superman is that with all this power, he uses it for the betterment of humanity, and it's the exact kind of person that everyone should aspire to be. That regardless of what you could easily do, you have to look past that and look into the general populace and what is better for them and less for you. That to me is the point of Superman. Someone who inspires the populace and does good because it's the right thing to do. I feel like Christopher Reeve's genuine performance both as Clark Kent and Superman, who again are the same person, if that isn't clear enough to you, is a really great way of showing that. He's a gentle person who's a little bit goofy at times, but is a regular guy, and he can make mistakes. He's not perfect, in every way. Because ultimately, not even Superman could be, but he's still, with that, able to be a figure that inspires everyone to be a better person. And that just is Superman to me, this kind of like goofy guy who wants to help people. And Margot Kidder as Lois Lane are really great together. I really believe their chemistry. I really believe this relationship. It's very, very cute. And I like as it continues onwards, it becomes more real. At least in the next one. We'll talk about that later on. But more importantly, I enjoy these two together. I feel like Margot Kidder is really great as Lois Lane. Lex Luthor isn't necessarily anything all that deep, but he is, still Gene Hackman. Gene Hackman tries his best to sort of eat every scene. He's very funny and very entertaining. And he's not my favorite Lex Luthor, definitely not. Certainly not if we, consider the animated stuff. But he's a lot better than, Jesse Eisenberg, but I do feel by seeing these great feats of strength that mixed with the great John Williams score show off how great this man could be, how great you could be, and that's why I really enjoy this movie. It's nothing all that deep, but it's fun, it's entertaining, its cast is so likable, it's just so fun, and it's inspiring, and that's what Superman needs to be. That's a Superman story for me. It's, better when there is some kind of even deeper aspect to do. Again, All-Star Superman is probably the best Superman story for a reason. But I feel like that story is only as great as it is because we have moments like this story that show off how great Superman is at all times. At least most times, obviously. This is Superman on a real good day, right? Where everything mostly pretty much works out, and that's all I really care. Listen, sometimes I don't need any kind of darker main character, or I don't need some kind of deeper plot. I just need cool superheroes doing cool things and likable characters with some point and message to your movie of do better, don't be bad, Superman. And that's it. I love this movie. Nowadays, you'll see that the effects aren't necessarily anything crazy impressive, but back then, they are immensely impressive. And yeah, you look at the flying scene and it's two people on a green screen with what is a shot that was more than likely done with a helicopter. But when you mix it together, you get this great view of this guy's life. I love this movie. It's so great. Now it gets a little bit more complicated. Following the absolute success that was indeed Superman, production immediately started in the second one, but due to the fact that Donner had some problems with the producers, he was fired as a director. He was replaced by Richard Lester. Richard Lester is a UK director who probably wasn't the best person to pick for this sort of movie. Several members of the cast and crew declined to return in the wake of Donner's firing, so a lot of the movie had to be reshot completely. So only some of the actors came back to do those, so yeah, it was a little bit weird. Regardless of all this, this movie still did very well and did result in a third one being greenlit. Marlon Brando sued the Salkinds for $50 million, claiming he never received his percentage of the film, which, he didn't, and tried to file a restraining order so that he, wouldn't ever be with them in a movie ever again, which, geez, Marlon, why? It's just a little bit harsh. The Mankiewicz written script was rewritten by co-screenwriters David and Leslie Newman. They added in new scenes involving Superman thwarting nuclear terrorists at the Eiffel Tower, Clark rescuing Lois at the Niagara Falls, and a new ending involving Clark kissing Lois through a hypnotic kiss to make her forget that he was Superman. Several people were hired to be the replacements of the people who had left due to the fact of Donner's firing, and it's not like any of them are, bad at their jobs. A bunch of them had worked on some great stuff. Reeves was originally unavailable due to the fact that he was starring in Somewhere in Time. The Salkinds filed a lawsuit against Reeves, alleging that he had breached his contract by walking off the set. But they were able to get Christopher Reeves onto the actual project when he agreed to their terms of what they were going to pay him. However, he demanded some more artistic control, which resulted in the other big changes that would continue in the film. The original script through what was already filmed and what had been refilmed was then recut together as Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, as that was released November 28th, 2006 on DVD. It is the much preferred version of the movie. Multiple reasons. Firstly, let's talk about the plot of the original. As mentioned, Zod, Ursa, and Non were sentenced to the Phantom Zone. The shockwave from the hydrogen bomb that was thrown into space apparently broke him out of the Phantom Zone, which is weird. I thought it was like a portal to a zone. That's kind of weird as multiple times instead of them just being in a floating cube. Odd. Lois and Superman, that being in his main identity, Clark Kent, are just at Niagara Falls. Mostly because Lois is trying to figure out if whether or not Clark is actually Superman or not, which, he is. but Clark is able to save her without exposing himself. However, that same night, Clark trips and his arm lands into a lit fireplace, where then Lois goes, "Oh, you're Superman! You're Superman!" Because that's how that works. So he goes, yeah, sure. He takes her to his Fortress of Solitude and is like, look, I'm an alien. And then due to the urging of his mother, Laura, who they brought back on due to the fact that, again, Marlon Brando said he wasn't going to come back, Superman removes his superpowers by exposing himself to a red Kryptonian sunlight in a crystal chamber. Honestly, listen, again, I love the relationship, but it was more that it was, like, still happening to be a thing. It wasn't fully a thing yet. So why did you do that? However, Zod shows up and they start just kind of palling around on Earth and hanging around, being goofy. They then go to the White House and force the President of the United States to surrender. And they're like, well, we've taken over the world. And after seeing both that and also getting beaten up by a guy who harasses Lois, which I'm surprised he can, because even though he's not like Superman anymore, he's still a beefy boy, so okay. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor, who has broken out of jail, easily breaks into the Fortress of Solitude and finds out about the fact that Superman is connected to Jor-El, to which he tells Zod. Very convenient, isn't it? Superman finds the green crystal that restores his power, which, you know, when you look at it, shouldn't have been the opposite colors, but whatever, I'm not going to question this movie. And then he fights them with the weird cape thing. That's still, I don't know why he does that. He fights them in the fortress, is able to put them back into the Phantom Zone. He flies Lex back to prison, and Lois, who's very upset that with the possibility that Superman might die eventually, which I don't know why you would think that, but alright. Clark kisses her, erasing her memories of the fact that he is Superman for good. Listen, is this movie that bad? No, it still gives me the exact same feeling that the original one did, but not as much. It just doesn't have that big epic feeling that Richard Donner's directing style really brought out, right? It feels even more like a typical superhero story. It feels even more like though it had a bigger budget, pretty low budget superhero serials of the 30s. It does still have Superman being a cool dude, just in general, with a very cute relationship with Lois Lane, who does accurately show the amazement of what Superman can do. Hell, Zod's still cool. A lot of that is from the, like, Richard Donner stuff, so Zod is still doing cool stuff regardless. And a lot of this, even though it's directed differently, is still basically the same exact plot. Though I don't agree with all of it because it's not exactly what I know in the comics, all of it still gives what Superman needs to be. A cool super dude who's trying to sacrifice what he wants out of life in order to do superhero stuff. And the ending, though it's not the better ending, is indeed still what Superman needs to do. Superman probably could have both a regular life and be a superhero, which I'm totally fine with having, by the way, but he's at the point where the world needs him more than Lois Lane does. And in an ending where that would have happened, that would have probably been a much better ending. And that's kind of what happens in the original Richard Donner cut. Firstly, the big difference is much better, much more interesting directions, which shows off Superman exactly as he should, as this big Superman. It's genuinely a lot more inspiring and a lot more interesting, as it shows Superman off way better than the Lester version of this movie. There are very subtle ways that Richard Donner just does a much better job at showing how cool and awe-inspiring Superman can be to the audience. It is not in the Niagara Falls, it is in fact Lois Lane that jumps out of a fucking building. I can't quickly finding ways to just like very subtly help her not die without him revealing himself, which is a lot more funny of a scene. And Lois Lane shoots him with blanks later on, which is way funnier because it shows that she didn't just like shoot the guy to like prove that he was Superman. It's more that she tricked him to thinking that it was regular bullets. In truth, she was just going, you revealing yourself is what I needed you to do. There's so much more Zod. Zod's fun in the original version, but there's a lot more of him in this cut, and he's very entertaining. I love Zod. He's so just crazy. Plus, Lex finds the Fortress of Solitude a lot quicker, and while that's still weird that he did that, they at least make a little bit more sense with him, you know, clearly being a billionaire. He just comes into plot in the Lester version of the movie, and he's a little bit more important in this. Well, while also not taking up as much screen time. Plus, Jor-El's whole scenes and Marlon Brando's acting just is so much better and still fits because why did his mom suddenly start having things that she had recorded? I mean, it's cool that she would also have that in there, and I'd imagine that that's still also a thing, right? But if but you know, it just feels like it makes more sense in terms of continuity. Also, Lois gets more obviously kidnapped, which is the reason he does the things that he does in this version, which is way better. And in the ending, we do get what I mentioned, that Lois Lane does acknowledge that though she loves Superman, she can't be with him because Superman needs to be there for the world. Superman is the kind of person who needs to be out there. The world needs Superman right now, not her. And it's this teary-eyed, genuine performance from these two, which genuinely gets me at the end of the movie. I love this ending, and though it does reverse time, because you can still do that, by the way, it's this ending that genuinely feels a lot better, like, built up to, because they spent more time with these characters in better written scenes in this version of the movie. Now, some scenes from the Lester version of the film are still using this, because again, it wasn't fully done, but they're able to very cleverly incorporate all that stuff to make it a much better film than the original. If you're gonna watch Superman 2, watch the Richard Donner cut. If you don't, you're missing out. Superman 2 does a good enough job at showing what makes Superman great, and it's fine for what it is. It's an okay follow-up to the movie, as it does everything that I feel like Superman needed to do, but it really feels more like those like other adventures of just like, you really liked issue 36, but now issues 37 to 42 were just, here's more of that, I guess, and then finally get to a much more interesting storyline in the one afterwards, you know? This movie feels like one of the storylines from one of those runs from one of those writers of, that's not bad, but I also didn't care all that much. The reason I did kind of care was the baseline made by Richard Donner that had aspects of its storyline set up in the original, and it feels a lot more satisfying to get the answers and the endings to that stuff in this second half of this big Superman storyline. It feels like not really one film, but more like two halves of one big adventure. Honestly, if you're gonna watch it, God's sakes, find the Richard Donner cut, because it is the like real actual conclusion to the adventures that begun in that first movie. Yeah, not as good as the first one even still, but I do think it's basically around that level of this great, inspiring storyline with a bunch of great, fun characters and a fantastic interpretation of Superman in live action, both in terms of its effects and its characterization of what makes Superman great. But for real though, what was that S thing? Why did he do that? It didn't even do anything. But thankfully enough, the second one was successful so that they would make another movie. For whatever reason, though it recouped its budget of $39 million, it wasn't as successful as the other two. I'm not quite sure why, considering the fact that the first two movies were very much praised by critics. Maybe it's the fact that the backstory and the drama of the filming really did get on people's nerves. And hell, this was 1983, so maybe people were just looking for something different. But what I can tell you is that there's a good reason why 4 didn't do all that well. Not only because it's 4, and also because it wasn't promoted well, but people also, if they weren't already turned off by this series by 2, they were definitely turned off by this movie. Oh my god. Buckle up! Not only was this movie a lot less successful financially, but also critically. It had harsh criticism focused on the film's comedic and campy tone, as well as the casting and performance of Richard Pryor. However, before we even get to what the actual third movie was, here's some ideas that it was going to be. During production of Superman 2, as you know, Richard Donner was fired. However, there were certain ideas that were written up that were then sort of looked at by Salkind, who then wrote a treatment for the third film, which would have included Brainiac, that guy, and Supergirl. It would be released online in 2007, and oh boy, Mr. portrayed the outline more like a generic evil wizard man. Meanwhile, Brainiac was from Kalu, as he was in the comics, and had discovered Supergirl in the same way that Superman was found by the Kents, and they may have had a romantic attraction to each other, which, okay. Then Superman, Supergirl, Brainiac, Jimmy Olsen, and Lana Lang, who was immediate in here because Margot Kidder was not going to come back, we'll get to that later, would go to the Middle Ages to fight Brainiac and Mrs. Biggism. And then Superman and Supergirl, who presumably were not related, would have gotten married at the ending. Or in Superman 4, which they were definitely planning on making. However, the Salkinds then decided to actually give her her own movie, which thankfully they went, oh shit, she's Superman's cousin. We're glad we didn't do that thing we were planning before. Turned the Brainiac stuff into a different kind of computer thing, and then decided to having Mr. Zibidabadubop they decided to have Richard Pryor. Also, P.S. I do know how to say his name. It's Mixelspiglik, but all right. Richard Pryor was brought into the movie, and he's the main character. Yeah, Richard Pryor, who is probably... Listen, he's a fine comedian, but he's not a great actor. Certainly not in this movie. Good God. He's the main character, and he's what we see in a majority of the movie. I had vague memories of the first two movies when I had rewatched them for the video, but this was my first time ever watching this movie. I knew who Richard Pryor was, like, of course, right? But, like, good lord, was I not ready for him to be the main guy. Metropolis-based conglomerate Websco hires Gus Gorman, a talented computer programmer, who, of course, you know, is Richard Pryor, who I'll be calling Richard Pryor for the rest of the whole review. He embezzles from his employer through salami slicing, which brings him to the attention of the CEO, Ross Webster, who apparently found out and went, oh, you can hack pretty well. Clark Kent, alongside Jimmy Olsen, go to visit Smallville for some kind of high school reunion, to both because he wanted to, and also for the paper, where he meets Lana Lang. Lois Lane apparently left for Bermuda on vacation, because again, Margot Kidder did not want to return after what happened in the previous movies. Clark has to pretend that he isn't Superman, as he then has a romantic picnic with Lana Lang, which kind of gets interrupted by some guy almost getting murdered by a compound harvester, just on its own. Hey, about that Richard Pryor plot. Evil billionaire wants Richard Pryor to command Vulcan, an American weather satellite that will create a tornado to destroy Columbia's coffee crop so that Webster can corner the market on coffee. This is the plot. Somehow, Richard Pryor has to go to Smallville to try and reprogram the satellite. It begins a storm, but Superman, you know, Supermans it. So then evil billionaire makes Richard Pryor make kryptonite. They create a bad kryptonite, which is made with tar, which they try and give Superman, which doesn't work immediately, but then makes Superman bad. He just sort of like messes up places, like very goofily and very petty stuff. Like he just like straightens out the Leaning Tower of Pisa and blowing out the Olympic flame. Like, I'm sorry? Because I guess the satellite hacking didn't work the first time. Evil businessman just goes, build a giant computer. Superman is asked to help out this plan, kind of messing up an oil tanker, which makes him have a nervous breakdown where he splits into two people. Superman splits into two people, and they fight in a junkyard. I've, like, given up at this point, and I hate my life. Thankfully enough, he's able to beat up his evil version, is able to go fight the evil computer, which, like, sucks in the one lady and turns her into a crazy computer lady, which is not what I thought would at all happen in this movie, where Superman fights against her, who's suddenly powered by kryptonite, and then Superman just goes away as it's trying to eat Richard Pryor, and then comes back with acid, and then just throws acid on it, which, what? Superman leaves evil businessman and Richard Pryor to get found by the police, which he assumes is coming. And oh hey, it's Lois Lane. She's in this movie. Remember when I said that she wasn't? She kind of wasn't, but she shows up right at the ending there, because I guess they're able to convince her for a quick paycheck. Yes, Superman does go back around and straightens up the Leaning Tower of Pisa, which, I don't know, you didn't need to?
It's the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Superman 3 is so stupid. I hate it. Now, keep in mind, it's not the worst film of all time. It's kind of fun, honestly, but not in a good way. What makes Superman great just isn't in this film. It's not this awe-inspiring, big, climactic movie. It's got more of Lester's boring directing, which goes even further into its grounded nature, and by that I mean it's always on the ground, and it goes way too goofy and campy, and it just ends up being not all that good at all. Well, this can result in it being kind of so bad that it's good type thing of you, good lord, you cannot go into this taking it seriously. But that's only because how else are you supposed to react to this movie? It's so stupid and nonsensical. It did at least try to continue making some pretty neat looking effects, but it almost tries a little bit too hard to feel comic booky, and mixed with its campy tone, it feels like it was made for children. And yes, Superman is, I feel, made for everyone, and everyone can enjoy it, but not in this way. It feels like this was, like, a bad Power Rangers movie, right? But though I don't need any kind of deeper storyline, I've mentioned that in the previous two movies, I need something out of this. And I feel like, in general, besides it being just bad and stupid, nothing really came out of this. I don't feel as inspired or as entertained in the same way as I do from Superman in this. And hell, after also watching both versions of 2, where it's clear that he knew that he couldn't be with Lois, him going with, Lana, it just feels weird. And listen, this Lana is no Lana from Smallville, and she's kind of boring, and they do not have any chemistry on screen together at all. I don't feel this romance in the slightest. Robert Vaughn, who is the main character of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. So of course I've seen him in other stuff, like in a bunch of stuff. And he's not a bad actor, but he sure is in this. How everyone is. I don't think Lester can get a good performance out of anyone. That main character being Richard Pryor is really annoying, and he's annoying, and I hate that character so much. But the goofy, absolute stupidity of this movie is what sort of makes up for the awful writing, the bad acting, even from Christopher Reeve, who at least it's clearly trying to do something with this script. You can kind of see where I mentioned that they turned Brainiac into that, so that's kind of Brainiac in live action. We'll get a better one later. Kinda? I'll get there, don't worry. Like, good God. Oh my God, this movie. I hate it. It's so stupid. I recommend the first two. I just cannot recommend this third one. Again, unless you want to have a stupid good time, get some beer, get some Angry Orchard, get some friends, make fun of this movie, because it is one of the perfect movies to just riff on the whole time. And the producers were beginning to think they should probably just pass it somewhere else, and their decision really came down to how well the spinoff would do. Because remember when I mentioned they decided to make that spinoff? Well, they made it almost immediately afterwards. Okay, now for the one I was really waiting to get to. So this was the one I was least really wanting to watch while I was watching all of these, because I didn't know anything about it, and I didn't care. But indeed, at the same time as purchasing the film rights to Superman, they also purchased the film rights to Supergirl. While again, they planned to make her a different thing, they decided to give her own movie, and they thankfully actually read the comics and found that the Supergirl that existed was his cousin. So great job there, guys. Hundreds of actors tested for the role of Supergirl/Linda, among them Demi Moore and Brooke Shields, which probably would have been better, honestly, because they decided to sign unknown actress Helen Slater, who was paid $75,000 in a 3-picture deal, which I know is a little bit more than in like modern money, but still she got really screwed out of an actual deal. So great, thanks guys. In this movie, Supergirl fights against a witch who was originally going to be played by Dolly Parton, which, God, I wish that happened so much. Warner Brothers, who was involved in the production of these films, did help out with this one, but more so than any of the other, the Salkinds financed this whole movie on their own, and it really feels that way. Due to the fact that Warner Brothers was really looking down on dealing with what was based on their own properties, as they were owning DC at this point, the relationship between the studio and the partnership was really strained for the critical and commercial underperformance of 3, so if this one wasn't doing well, they were quickly going to lose those rights. And oh boy, it didn't. And not only did it didn't, but this movie, alongside the movie that would come out a few years later, would be nominated for and would win multiple raspberries. Though this one also got nominated for a Saturn Award, which I feel like Saturn doesn't really watch the movies that they nominate things for, so yeah. Supergirl. Supergirl has, obviously a very similar origin story to the actual Supergirl in the comics, if you know about her. She comes from the Kryptonian community in Argo City. It's slightly different than the one that's in the bottle, but it is indeed a Kryptonian city that was put in a interdimensional space, which is this called inner space, so they wouldn't get totally destroyed. Zoltar, a wizard, allows Kara to observe a unique and immensely powerful item known as the Omegahedron, which is just a bath bomb, but okay. It gets accidentally rocketed onto space, which Kara now needs to go and find. Due to this, she gets to Earth and becomes Supergirl, and quickly just like, weird. Selena, the Hungry Power witch, wants to get out of a relationship with a warlock named Nigel, uses magic with help of the Omegahedron, and wants to use it for her own desires because she's evil and evil witch lady. Kara goes under the identity of Linda Lee and pretends to be the cousin of Clark Kent because she kind of knows that Clark Kent is Superman, and she decides to have a similar outfit because, again, it does just come from where they come from, so that kind of makes sense as she starts calling herself Supergirl. She befriends Lucy Lane, younger sister of Lois Lane, as she enrolls into an all-girls school, which, despite being an all-girls school, has a male groundskeeper who she of course falls in love with, because this is a movie and there needs to be some kind of love story. But don't worry, because so does the witch who creates a love potion, which doesn't fully work, so she gets a construction vehicle to go get him, which Supergirl fights, which, okay. And due to this and the love potion, he falls in love with Lana, but also technically Supergirl, actually. Selina captures Ethan and then traps Supergirl and sends her into the Phantom Zone, which again is a dimension. I'm surprised she doesn't meet Zod there, because they're back in it. Finds Zoltar there, who just sent him there off screen because he felt bad about losing the Omegahedron, which is so stupid. Because he then dies so that Kara can get out, which is just very convenient. Thanks, wizard. And this happens so quickly, like so very quickly immediately afterwards. Like, it's almost entirely pointless. But don't worry, because the actual big ending is Witch summons a demon, where she just turns the demon against the witch, and then she traps him in a whirlwind through a portal, which is just like, okay. Ethan, now saved, goes up. I know you're that girl from the school I work at. Don't worry, Supergirl. I won't tell anybody. And then she brings the Omegahedron back to her home, probably not returning because why would she? Supergirl from 1984 is one of the worst movies I've seen in my life. It's so bad. Though it had a $35 million budget, only getting $14 million at the box office, which, wow, holy shit. That is the biggest bomb I've seen in my life. Might as well get Star-Bombed out in this shit because, oh my god. But for real though, I'm glad not a lot of people actually have ever seen this or ever talked about it because it's just so bad. The acting's horrible. It feels like barely anyone tried throughout this entire movie. Now, the actor for Jimmy Olsen, who's in all of these movies, by the way, does show up in this, and he's probably the only actually good actor in this. Faye Dunaway, who is Selina, and again, I wish that it was Dolly Parton instead, does an okay job. I at least kind of believe that she is a crazy witch lady. She's been in a lot of stuff, but she's so much better in all that other stuff. Good lord, did it feel like she was trying, but she just couldn't get anything out of this script? Helen Slater has been in other stuff as well, most importantly having a very small role in both later Smallville and Supergirl. But this being her first role really feels like it. It feels like she can barely take out any emotion out of any scene ever. It feels like she's a robot that has come from space instead of a cool alien person. Ever more so than 3, it feels like things just happen to happen, right? Scenes just go by way too quickly. I get nothing out of any character, and just this feels like the biggest budgeted B movie I've ever seen in my life. How they got certain actresses and actors like Mia Farrow and Peter O'Toole, I have no idea, but none of them even get to squeak out any amount of acting prowess in the slightest. And again, every actor in this has done better things. There's a truck driver who's played by friggin' Max Headroom. And I didn't even know that till reading this script right now, because that's how forgettable this movie is. God, did they clearly just like set a certain amount of things and then just not care where it was going to go? I think all the budget went to actually getting these named actors just to get in this movie, to be like, oh, we got them. We got this guy. You like them? And then vaguely making it look like Superman. They tried their best to make it look like the previous movies, and they failed so horribly. I didn't even know this movie had that big of a budget. How? Where did all that go? Did all the budget go to hookers and blow? Like, what happened? This was the mid-80s. And the problem with it is it's so boring. Nothing happens for a good majority of it, and due to the fact that you don't care about any of the characters because you get nothing out of any of this, there's no chemistry in the slightest, and the directing is so boring. It being made by the same hack that helped make Jaws 2 really goes to show you how entirely pointless this movie is. But you know what else that guy made? He helped make Santa Claus the movie, the next movie that these producers would go ahead and make after selling the rights to the Superman movies to Canon Films. Canon Films, which were basically the 70s and 80s version of Asylum, if you've seen those, the kinds of people that make the quick budget direct-to-DVD stuff before DVD was really popular. But like those people who quickly made this stuff out of absolutely nothing, who by the way helped make He-Man the movie. So there you go. Those guys, the most cost-cutting bullshitters in the world, were given the rights for Superman 4. The Quest for Peace. The now 5th film of the series, with the 4th film that is just called Superman 4: A Quest for Peace, as mentioned, was made by the Cannon Group, who at this point, the big cost cutters were suffering a major financial crisis and were forced into major budget cuts. 45 minutes of the footage were deleted after negative test screenings originally. A lot of it is pretty pointless, but weirdly enough did have some extra scenes which made it make a little bit more sense, at least kind of. and had a secondary fight with a Bizarro-esque evil Superman, whom of course would later become the main evil Superman that we see in the movie, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the only reason why they were able to get Christopher Reeves on this movie at all was due to the fact that they were like, he could help write it, and he sure did, because at that point this was right in the middle of still the Cold War, so Christopher Reeves went, you know what, I want to talk about Ronald Reagan's military buildup and skepticism towards arm control. And it's like, that's, sure, okay, I guess. That's not a bad thing to talk about in terms of it, but like, probably a bad idea to do it in the way they did. Wes Craven was almost gonna to direct this film, as was Ron Howard, but they instead got Sidney J. Furie.
Never heard of it.
Never will. Pinching pennies at every step, they cut the budget from 36 to 17 million, sold several rights of other stuff that they had for an extra little bit of $5 million. I'm pretty sure all of that was used to bring in Lex Luthor, because yeah, he's back. Lex Luthor in this movie takes a little bit of Superman DNA that he kind of had, and he puts it on one of the nukes that Superman takes, as Superman takes all of the nukes of the world. Not only is that probably illegal, but he also just has them blow up into space, which probably would be bad for the general atmosphere. But you know, we're not going to focus on that because I'm sure everyone and their mother has said that, so whatever. But this creates Nuclear Man, who, good God, looks like the goofiest man in the world. He, with his weird crazy claws and worse version of Superman powers, kicks Superman's ass and gives him radiation sickness, which is weird that he can get that. And then Superman quickly restores himself with this weird green energy thing that he had from his alien mom, who I don't know what the purpose of it would have been originally before nearly dying, but okay. Then we get one big dumb little fight where they fight the moon causing an eclipse, which this somehow nullifies Nuclear Man's powers because he gets his power from the moon, which is not how Superman's powers work. Why would it work that way? What? Then he just dies, and then Superman throws him into the fucking core, and then gives the worst speech in the world ever.
And there will be peace. There will be peace when the people of the world want it so badly that their governments will have no choice but to give it to them.
Superman 4 is the biggest pile of shit in the world. Like, good God, it's awful. What a terrible excuse for a movie. And listen, I'm not the first person who said that in the world, like, at all. It's probably one of the, like, biggest punching bags on the internet. It's calmed down in recent years considering the like age of people who make these kinds of videos, but let me go ahead and remind everyone that Superman 4 is one of the worst movies of all time. Everyone can agree to that, but it's in the way of, it is absolutely one of those movies that due to its small budget, it looks absolutely horrendous, and with its terrible script by a man who was clearly trying his hardest to say a message, it comes off heavy-handed and stupid at the same time. It is the perfect example of so bad that it's absolutely fantastic. Now you'll probably need something a little bit stronger than an Angry Orchard this time, but absolutely, get some beers, get some friends. This is the perfect movie to riff on. It is awful. The acting's terrible, especially from the actors who are here from before, who clearly are not trying, because I feel like mid-production, they figured it out. They're in barely any of it. God knows they barely cared during any of it. All chemistry of these characters is gone. All messages of how cool Superman is and how inspiring he is just non-existent in this. It is pure, stupid, cheesy superhero nonsense. Nuclear Man is one of the worst costumes I've seen in my life. I hate him, I hate him, I hate him, but I love him at the same time. You know, Mark Pillow, the actor, doesn't have a Wikipedia page. I can't even tell if this man's been in anything else.
Oh my God, you could grind meat on it. Ah!
Also, Lenny, dear sweet Lenny, the nephew of Lex Luthor that broke him out of prison somehow.
Whoa, good thing I bought my drums.
You know, Gene Hackman voiced Nuclear Man. The actor just played him. It's like Arnold back in the like Hercules movie. It's like that, and it's very noticeable. Technically, John Williams did this score, but it's really an adaptation of this score by Alexander Courage, which, yeah, I'm sure you did, but he actually is the guy who helped compose the original Star Trek series, so it's probably the only good part of this film, of that it sounds good. It sounds like Superman. I could look at this and see the character dressed up as Superman and hear it and be like, yep, that's a Superman film, but in every other aspect, it is the most basic schlocky garbage of the like 60s and 70s, like a decade or two after when it would have made sense. This movie is awful when you watch it on its own, but especially when you watch it like back to back with the others, is you see the quick decline declining quality of these movies. Like 3, bad, definitely bad, but not as bad as Supergirl, and neither of those are as bad as Superman 4. Now, maybe I could argue that Supergirl's worse than Superman 4, because at least I could laugh at Superman 4, right? Like, I definitely have and will laugh a lot at Superman 4, because it's, you know, stupid. Whether it be its horrendous pacing, or writing, or acting, or effects, which especially the effects. Good lord, look at that rebuild the wall beam. That's so stupid. I hate it so much. But if I had to show someone what to not do in a superhero film, it would be this immediately. If you could watch this and I tell you never do this, we probably make a lot more good superhero films. The unfortunate part about this would be kind of the end of the Superman franchise. Now, obviously, we would get later Superman movies, right? Superman is still very much around in live action. But this would spark the end for this part of the Superman franchise. But there is a multitude of references to these movies, mostly the first 2, in Superman Returns. And I fully feel that Superman Returns is a sequel to this movie. Hell, it directly references what I mentioned in the first one, My Day with Superman. I fully feel like Superman Returns is Superman 5. Brandon Routh was picked to be Superman due to the fact that Christopher Reeve's wife had went, "That's the spitting image of my husband." And while I don't fully agree with that, I guess, I do think that Brandon Routh is a great choice to replace Christopher Reeves as an actor. Kate Bosworth is Lois Lane, and Kevin Spacey is Lex Luthor, which, you know, makes sense. And we do technically get Kitty Kowalski replacing Eve Tessmacher from the 78 film, but honestly, she's so similar that it just feels like you might as well. And hell, the voice of Marlon Brando is in Superman Returns, so don't tell me that this isn't related to those films. I fully feel like it is, and I fully feel like it's the great ending to this franchise. Because regardless of the absolute nonsense that was those last 2, technically 3 movies, the character arc of Superman continued onward. Superman continued to learn that he needs to let go of a regular normal life and belongs to the world. Superman needs to save the world, and he isn't able to have everything that he wants. And that is exactly what happens in Superman Returns. Superman Returns, directed by Bryan Singer, who came up with the idea, who basically helped replace the ideas that were being worked on during that point by the new producers. There was several unsuccessful projects shortly after The Quest for Peace. Michael Dougherty wanted a sequel that would have been action-packed, featuring other Kryptonians and even Brainiac, maybe even Bizarro. Jim Caviezel wanted to be Superman, which that would have been awesome. And then, of course, there's the big story of Kevin Smith was about to make a movie, and then the producers went, no, but at least those ideas were written down later. Unlike the other times he's done that, it wasn't made into a comic book. But at least we do have production stills from it, and the bad CGI replication of what could have been there in the recent garbage Flash movie. So, neat, I guess. Bryan Singer brought up the idea of, hey, I can make a Superman, and they sure let him do that. Superman, who's been missing for 5 years, or at least quite a while, has to deal with the fact that Lex has gotten out of prison and has married a rich widow to obtain her fortune after her death. He seemingly has given everything up. And Superman has returned, as well as Clark Kent has, to see that Lois Lane is engaged to Perry White's nephew, Richard, and they too have a 5-year-old son named Jason. Plus the fact that she has written a now Pulitzer Prize-winning article, Why the World Doesn't Need Superman. But after saving a shuttle that was about to fall into Metropolis, it's clear that she was wrong, and Superman has returned. Great. Perry assigns Lois to interview Superman, while Clark investigates these blackouts that have been happening across the city, which is funny, considering that when the original Superman film was being filmed, that was during some real-life blackouts in New York, so weird. But Lois and Jason are captured after accidentally getting on Lex Luthor's yacht, and soon finds out that the blackouts are because of him, because he's making a big kryptonite thing. It will make which involves him making a big landmass from combined kryptonite that's been falling to the Earth, I guess, sure. And it's gonna basically fall onto the United States and kill a whole bunch of people, and Superman can't stop it because it's kryptonite. Superman tries his best to stop the big landmass from rising. Meanwhile, Lois is helped out by her son, who's ends up, of course, obviously being Superman's kid because he throws a piano. However, all the kryptonite gets to Superman, and he gets caught and gets beat the shit out of him. Like, good lord. And is even stabbed by a shard of kryptonite. Lois, of course, finds him, removes the big shard, and is just like, that baby yours. You are the father. Which gives him enough reason to push the big landmass back into the sky and blow it up. Which, honestly, is awesome. Though Superman seemingly falls into a coma, he's able to get out of it. as Lois Lane writes a new article basically kind of retracting what she said like a year ago, which, alright, you won like a Pulitzer Prize for that, I don't know, whatever. I guess they just hand those things out. But Superman does visit his son, which is pretty neat. This is also probably the first time that anything acknowledged that Superman could even have a kid. I really enjoy this film, actually. I think it's probably on or near the same level as the original. It gives me everything I want to see out of Superman. Superman isn't this man with this, like, deep hatred to this guy who took his girlfriend. He's not this guy who's constantly pining over this woman and not understanding her boundaries. He's a regular dude and has made mistakes and hasn't been able to hold on this relationship that he clearly cares about. But he does that because he's a person who wants to make these sacrifices because he feels like he needs to help save the world. He's a selfless individual who knows that he needs to do things that aren't what he would want to do because he has to do things that he needs to do. He's an inspiring figure that does all this stuff that physically most people would barely dream to be able to do. This feels in every way the exact same character that was in the Christopher Reeves movies. This is absolutely the same Superman, and when you really go into this movie thinking that, this feels so much better than it would be if you just went into it thinking that it's someone new, you know? If you go into the idea that this is just like a general idea of what Superman is, and you're like, whatever, is him and Lois, I mean, obviously, But if you go into it knowing that this is that version of Superman, it makes it even more emotionally satisfying of an ending of Superman is sort of able to get his cake and eat it too. As kryptonite and weird as that cake might be. Superman does have a son, and his relationship does kind of continue with Lois Lane, who at this point has clearly figured out that Clark Kent is in fact Superman, I guess, because of course he is. I mean, like, come on. For 5 years, Superman goes missing and Clark Kent goes missing? Weird. It is in such a way where he doesn't just get the girl at the ending, because that's not what Superman should do. That's not the point of this movie. It's Superman at his best, once more, is exactly what I want to see out of Superman. That's what I love out of Superman. Plus, they still got these bright colored, tights, and while they do try to modernize a little bit, it still feels and looks exactly like Superman. Bryan Singer does a great job replicating what worked in those original movies. Not just making those neat little references, but bringing back these characters that feel exactly the way they should. This evil, spiteful villain who is clearly just absolutely mad and is tired of losing all this time, and has really been so spiteful after losing the previous time that he's ready to do this crazy stuff. The Superman arc really comes to its conclusion at the end of Superman Returns, as he fully understands what he needs to do. As Superman, though he knows he can't necessarily have a relationship, as he needs to constantly always go around the world helping everyone, he does see that he was able to leave a legacy and still sort of have a family, as he now has a son. This movie never got a sequel, though it definitely had plans to make a sequel, and since then we've had, obviously, Henry Cavill, but this, to me, is peak Superman, right? But hey, even though this movie never got a sequel, it did have an appearance, and hey, here it is, here's the reason I'm talking about it, in Crisis on Infinite Earths, the big Arrowverse crossover. The Christopher Reeve's Brandon Routh Superman does show up, once again played by Brandon Routh, blue eye contacts and gray streak and all, in a sort of like slightly altered version of this character. A very great appearance which perfectly brings back that version of the character. It really, matters because this movie matters, and Christopher Reeves is probably the best Superman out there, at least in live action, and asterisk also with Brandon Routh, I guess. Mostly through this man's physique, mostly because of his jaw. He gives this genuine, believable performance of this nice, even if a little bit bumbly, but soft-spoken, while at the same time inspirational and strong guy that is exactly what I want to see out of Superman. And whether it be through the directing of Richard Donner or Bryan Singer, I feel like this character is a perfect representation of what I want to see out of this character. Other Supermen have come pretty close in some scenes of their movies or TV shows, but none of them get it as right as Christopher Reeves. Hell, even in the bad movies, he still feels like the same character. This still same character who, regardless of all of the ins and outs of this franchise, stays consistent as this great, lovable Superman throughout the entire of the series. And even if the relationship becomes strained and not as believable as it was, the relationship between him and Lois Lane are very much the crux of the franchise, and it's always cool to see how all of it goes on. And I feel like Superman Returns is the needed conclusion to that arc, right? The reason you care about these two characters is because of their great chemistry, which is, again, sort of there in 3 and 4. And even if they're not the same actors and they look a little bit different and it's many years later, it's definitely still the same characters. And when you have that ending, it really makes everything worth it. If you haven't already watched it, as stupid as some of this can be, it's this journey that I feel like is absolutely worth your time. Whether it be enjoying some inspirational, well-made movies by Richard Donner, or some god-awful, stupid, goofy movies that it's really just good to watch while you're drunk, you bring it all together into Superman Returns, and you get to see Superman at his absolute best. At least Superman at his best, even if his movies aren't. And because we're getting all into the Arrowverse, we're going to need to get into that big crossover with all of those little references, and for the same reason why it was fun to watch the other shows, for the little cameos they have in there, the much more important full appearance of this character who's actively plot important to that later Arrowverse crossover is a definite reason to watch these movies, or at least just Superman Returns. But I do like to think that this Superman that's helping them is the same one, the same guy that I grew up knowing as Superman. Christopher Reeves is my Superman. So I love Smallville and I do love Henry Cavill. It's just, I feel like Christopher Reeves gives me everything I want to see out of Superman. But that is the Christopher Reeves Superman. It is, again, as I've mentioned, exactly what I want to see out of Superman. I probably said that a little bit too much at this point, so it's kind of, I've said everything I need to say about these movies. And again, if you haven't already seen these, absolutely do. Some are just really great and worth your time, and others are just stupid and fun, and just, you know, pour back a brewski. But like, still, if you want to fully get into what Superman is at his best, this is the best way to do it. And if you want to join us on the big run-through of everything even vaguely involved in the Arrowverse, then this is definitely something worth getting into. Not only because it gives you a big introduction on why Superman is great, and you can really get a good idea when you get into the Supergirl TV show, which vaguely is like, you know, Superman is kind of like that guy. And same goes for Smallville too, right? But also, I love seeing cameos of characters that I know, and like knowing what they've been through and seeing the little bits of references. You can be like, oh, hey, I know what that's a reference to. And if you're like me, then yeah, absolutely go ahead and watch these films. But yeah, if that isn't clear, the like one episode appearance, but still plot important appearance of Brandon Routh's version of Superman, which only I and a few people even think is the same Superman as his Superman, is the only reason I'm talking about him, but also because I just enjoy these films and I just want to talk about them and talk about how stupid Superman 3 and 4 are, you know? This was fun. I'm glad I went through all this. This was definitely worth my time, right? But that being said, there's still more DC stuff we're going to get into. So if you enjoyed these movies and talking about them with me, then get ready for next time, as we'll be talking about the Batman Burton-verse and also other ones, quadrilogy of movies, right? Batman in 1989, its sequel, and then the two very toyetic sequels that quickly ruin things, but are also fun in the same ways as Superman. In fact, they both kind of run the same line in the exact same way, don't they? That'll be, I think, even more fun to get through. But indeed, if you enjoyed this, go ahead and subscribe and leave a comment on what you enjoyed and what you didn't enjoy about the Superman movies. But more importantly, if you want me to talk about any other DC stuff besides the stuff I'm already going through, then go ahead and leave that stuff in the comments and leave a like, share this with everyone you know. But more importantly, stay good, stay safe, don't be an asshole.